Hello and welcome everybody. This is Grandmaster Sam Shankland, and today I would like to start a new series. This one's going to be a bit longer than the previous ones I've done. 4 different series so far, all of which were only 3 videos, and this one's actually going to be 5. And this series is going to specifically talk about the imbalance of knight versus bishop. Now, this can come about in a variety of ways, and I've actually covered some similar positions in my series on the bishop pair, but this one's going to focus more on when it's a single knight against a single bishop, as opposed to, say, 2 bishops against bishop and knight, where in general the 2 bishops will usually be better. So, before we get started with the actual gameplay of the first example, I'd like to just speak about some general rules and ways that the bishops and knights relate to each other. The bishop's advantage over the knight is that it is a long-range piece and it can influence both sides of the board at the same time. This becomes especially relevant when you're looking at an endgame, where let's say one side has a pawn majority on the king side and the other has a pawn majority on the queen side, and you have a pawn race. The bishop will be much more effective than the knight at both aiding the pawns to push through as well as halting the opponent's pawns from getting anywhere. Secondly, in addition to the bishop being better when the pawn structure is imbalanced, it's also going to be better on an open board. So, without further ado, I'd like to get into our first example. I think this is a great way to illustrate some of the points I'm hoping to make. Oftentimes I find it hard to speak about sort of conceptual ideas in chess without actually referring to concrete examples. So here, I'm hoping that this concrete example will come out. Now, this is a reasonably famous game that I'm sure many of the viewers will already know. This is a game between Bobby Fischer and Tigran Petrosian in the candidates matches of 1971 as Fischer was ascending to the World Championship. And there was a decision that Fischer took shortly that really shocked the chess world at the time. I think in modern times it would be much more natural, but well, we'll see what it is. At this point, white is clearly better. He has an active knight on c5, and his pawn structure is superior, and his pieces are just better. I mean, he's got a better pawn structure and better pieces. This leads white to have a nice advantage, but the game is far from over. Material is equal, black has a reasonably solid position, and Tigran Petrosian in particular is well known for being a ferocious defender, very good with prophylactic play and stopping his opponents from achieving what they want to achieve. So it takes a lot of effort to put him away. You can't just expect to win the game once you get a better position. So at this point, Petrosian played the move bishop d7, which gives Fischer an opportunity to decide if he wants to take this bishop or not. So I'd like the viewers to take some time and pause. If you've seen this game, obviously the exercise won't be quite as useful as if you come in fresh, but nonetheless, I would like to invite the viewers to pause their videos and decide to themselves, would you like to take this bishop or not? Okay, so if you want more time, I would suggest that you please keep your videos paused, but I'm going to keep on going. So in this case, it looks really strange at first glance, at least it did at the time, for white to take this bishop. I think Fischer was even criticized for lacking culture for this move or something like that. It's like this beautiful knight on c5 for a passive bishop on d7, and a bad bishop at that that's sort of on the same color as its pawns, and it feels wrong. But when you look more closely and you think about it, black actually has an idea with the move bishop b7. If white were to simply improve his position, let's say king f2, white is aiming to centralize his king, get his pieces into play, etc., etc. Black has a very strong move available in bishop b5, and he's hoping to trade off these bishops, at which point he can open up the c-file and hope to invade like that. Now, there's no doubt that after something like king e3, bishop takes d3, king takes d3, white remains better here. But it's not that easy. I would even consider a move like a5 now for black. Now, this looks a little bit suspicious because it allows b5, which would give white a very strong passed pawn, but after rook c7, white's going to immediately have to abandon the c-file, and black seems to have at least some counterplay. In addition to a5, black could start with a move like rook c7, or even rook b8 here is interesting. Something like rook b8, now this pawn is on b4 is hanging, and if a3, then a5, and here I think black should be holding a draw with no particular trouble. Probably it's more resilient for white to play rook b1, but still, I think that black is getting a lot more saving chances than he has to. Similarly, if white were to try to avoid the exchange of bishops, thinking, look, I have a good bishop against a bad bishop, with something like bishop c2, black has a very important resource here with the move a5. Now, this is going to start trading pawns, and it's well known that if you have a worse position in the endgame, the worse side should be trading pawns and the better side should be trading pieces. It's a general rule that must always be double checked in each individual position, but indeed it does hold true here. This looks wrong at first because white can play a4, attacking the bishop, and once the bishop moves away, say to e8, after b5, white's got a very strong passed pawn. Now, forgetting the fact that actually I can play a rook to the c file and win on the spot here. In addition, black has this nice move a takes b4, after which white cannot take the bishop on b5 due to the pin to the rook on a1. So first and foremost in this position, black has a strategic idea to play bishop b5. But secondly, if we think about the position after knight takes d7 check, rook takes d7, here we're seeing an exact case of where the bishop will be much better than the knight. And that's a situation where you have an open board and an imbalanced pawn structure. Here, white has a queenside pawn majority, and black has this d5 pawn in the center. Now, this is maybe not the best example because black was worse no matter what he did. White had other ways to a big advantage, but I like this one for its simplicity. And after rook c1, we're seeing here that white has some very active rooks on open files while blacks are passive. And you could think to yourself, well, so what? Black can start exchanging rooks with moves like rook e8 or rook e7. But if you actually start thinking about it, he can't really. After rook e8, he's going to lose the pawn on a6. After something like takes, knight takes e8, and bishop takes a6, white is completely winning. And rook e7, after something like takes, I can play, say, rook c7 check. And the black king will have to go to the back rank because if king d6, he loses the pawn on f7. And if king e6, he loses the pawn on a6. And after something like this and say, I don't know, a4, it's just very clearly very difficult for black. This bishop on d3 is performing a wonderful role. It threatens some kingside pawns even. It's putting a lot of pressure on the queen side, and it stops the d5 pawn from even dreaming of advancing. In the meanwhile, if you think about when bishops are good, they generally are good on open boards. While the knights are better in positions where all the pawns are concentrated on one side, which obviously we don't have here, but they're also good when they have outposts, strong squares in the center from which they can operate. And here, the black knight on f6 is really lacking any kind of active prospects. So after rook c1, black has quite a difficult position here. In fact, I would go so far as to call it lost. He has basically nothing constructive to do, while white's rooks dominate the open files, and soon enough he can start attacking weak pawns. So black tried rook d6, which strikes me as pretty lackluster, but it's very hard to suggest an alternative. And white simply invaded with rook c7. And we're noting that even though white's rooks are more active than black's, even much more active, black can't really exchange them. For example, right now the biggest threat for white would be rook e to e7, after which he can decimate the 7th rank. But there's not really much black can do about this. Let's say rook a d8, which looks very natural to me, to try to play rook d7 and trade a bunch of stuff. But here after rook e7, black doesn't really want to play rook d7, because after something like takes, rook a7, white is simply picking up this pawn on a6. The bishop on d3 is performing an excellent role, both blockading the d-pawn as well as targeting the a-pawn. For instance, after the move d4, white can play as a very important move rook takes a6. If white were to be foolish enough to take with the bishop, then after d3, he's going to have a lot of trouble stopping this pawn, and black's, in fact, I think just queening the pawn directly, white will have to give his bishop. But because he can play rook takes a6, this bishop on d3 is serving double duty, attacking this weak pawn on the queen side, as well as stopping the d-pawn from making any kind of progress. So, at this point after rook c7, I believe white has a decisive advantage. I think that black is basically without counterplay and in a really tough spot. Similarly, rook e6 is a thought. Now, white has several routes to a large advantage here, but the one that resonates the most with me is simply f4. I think this looks very, very strong for white, and a lot of black stuff is hanging after rook takes e5, but if he doesn't take on e5, it's very hard to even suggest a move for him. In the meantime, white will maybe slowly but surely h3 just to stop knight g4 and be safe, and then start running up the king to d4. In addition, white could consider simply taking this rook, and after f takes e6, playing a very strong move f4. Now, this is important for a few reasons, but most principally, it's to stop the move e5. And that's because when you're playing with a bishop, really against anything, but in particularly against a knight, you really would like to fix your opponent's pawns on the same color as your bishop. That way you can target them later. And here, if you look, we have 3 black pawns here that are all on white squares that are going to be quite vulnerable. Already, rook c6 is a threat. In fact, white probably could have just gone rook c6 and gone pawn hunting last move. I don't know why I was hesitant to do it, but I think f4 spoils absolutely nothing, and here black is entirely without counterplay, and all of his pawns are falling, and it's very, very clear that the white bishop is better than the knight. Black tried to resist it differently with knight d7, and while this prevents rook e7 for the moment, after rook e2, black is nearly in stalemate. It's almost impossible for him to find a move. So he plays g6, and while his position is very bad no matter what he does, here I just found it a little bit amusing that every single pawn in black's position is located on a light square, which means it's prime pickings for that bishop on d3 to start targeting all of them. And in the meantime, if you look at this very sorry knight on d7, first of all, it can't even move because rook e7 would come as a result. But more importantly, it has no outposts in the center that it could ever go to. It has no real place where it would be called a happy home. Fischer simply plays king f2, bringing the last piece into the game. Petrosian tried h5, and now another strong move f4, just forever killing any ideas of knight e5 and potentially preparing for f5 in the future. So I think if given time, white's plan will probably be something like g3, h3, g4, and slowly but surely expand on the king side, and this should win the game without a ton of fuss. Black tried h4, and then white played king f3, which is a very good move. This forces black's hand because if white is allowed to play king g4, he's going to scoop up the pawn on h4, and then in addition to all of black's other woes, he'll simply be down a pawn for nothing. And keep in mind, the whole time this is happening, black is really unable to activate the rook on a8, because the only active square it could go to, if rook b8, just a3 is always good. And if rook e8, white always is able to go takes, takes, and rook a7, which wins a key pawn. This is probably why Fischer wanted to play f4, to avoid knight e5 check in this position. I'm sure it was one of his reasons. So after king f3, f5, Fischer played king e3, which is a very good move. If allowed, he would love to play the move king d4, which would really put a clamp down on black's position. White would pretty quickly scoop up the d5 pawn. Now black could play rook e8 check here, but still after something like king d4, takes, takes, all of black's pawns are just so weak and his pieces are passive, and I see no defense to the simple threat of rook a7 followed by rook takes a6, clipping a clean pawn, and white will win the game in short order. So black decided not to let the white king into d4 by playing d4 check himself, and this makes a lot of sense. He wants to keep the king at bay, but unfortunately for him, this opens up a whole host of other problems, because now this king is sitting in front of the d-pawn. He doesn't have to worry about that at all, and white is ready to play bishop c4, which will activate the bishop and put it on a very active square. So black, still basically in Zugzwang here, tried knight b6 just to avoid allowing bishop c4, but of course this was a very futile defensive attempt, so white can invade with rook e7, and as he did in the game. And his point is that after knight d5, which forks the rooks, all white has to do is include this one little in-between move, rook f7 check, and after the king moves rook b7. Now both of these rooks are immune from any sort of harassment whatsoever, and white is completely winning. The simplest threat is rook h7, which would lead to checkmate in short order. Black tried knight takes f4, just I guess to grab a pawn. I mean, at this point it's very clear that he's completely lost. And after bishop c4, he had to throw in the towel because he cannot stop rook h7. For instance, knight e6 would be, I guess, an attempt to block it on f8. And I don't even think this stops rook h7, because if knight f8, I have bishop f7 check, king d8, and rook h8, and this seems winning. But it doesn't even matter, because instead of rook h7, white can simply play rook e7 check and collect the knight on e6 to remain a clean piece to the good, and black has basically nothing to say about that. And without knight e6, I don't think black can even stop direct checkmate. For instance, if he makes, I don't know, some other move, g5 after rook h7. Let's play rook g7, actually, to be more accurate, just because here, after knight g6, bishop f7 check, we're simply winning this knight on g6 for nothing. Well, after rook h7, it's a little bit more complicated. Still, after this, black is completely lost, since rook g6 would fail to bishop f7 check, and finally rook f6 would fail to rook g8 check. And after rook f8, it looks like black has everything under control for just a moment, but unfortunately white just jumps in with bishop f7 check, king d8, and rook takes f8 mate. We're noting that this whole time the rook on a8 was able to play no active role in the game. So this was a really nice game from Fischer, who is really a long-term champion of the bishop over the knight. I think we'll see another game where we see the bishop triumph. He really liked his bishops, and it showed in his career, and he had a lot of success playing with the bishop against the knight. This was my favorite of his many great victories as such, but I think that we'll see at least one more before the series is over. But until then, this is Sam Shankland. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a good day.